10th plus 2 வில் ஒவ்வொரு ஆண்டும் தொடர்ந்து மாநில அளவில் பல சாதனைகளை புரிந்து வரும் நாமக்கல் குறிஞ்சி கல்வி நிறுவனங்களில் CBSE பாடத்திட்டத்தில் சீனியர் செகண்டரி பள்ளியாக தரம் உயர்த்தப்பட்டு IIT நீட் தேர்வுகளுக்கு பல வெற்றியாளர்களை உருவாக்கிய ஆசிரியர்களை முழு நேர ஆசிரியர்களாக பணியமர்த்தப்பட்டு தினம்தோறும் வகுப்புகள் நடைபெறும்.
குறிஞ்சி எஜுகேஷனல் இன்ஸ்டிடியூஷன் காவேட்டிப்பட்டி நாமக்கல். Admission in progress. CBSE KG to 12 contact 9025895176. Metric 6 to 12 contact 9344567484. For online admission log on to www.kurinjischoolnkl.in.
In continuation to the last class, in this class we are going to discuss two example problems related to the last class information. Okay ma? Right. So in our last class we focused to learn what is the condition for constructive interference and destructive interference in terms of small d, capital D and wavelength of light. So here small d means distance between the two slits from Young's experiment, and capital D is the distance between the slits and the screen on which interference pattern will take place. So there itself we derived an expression for constructive interference and destructive interference, that is S2P minus S1P is equal to S2P minus S1P is equal to X into small d by capital D. That you can also write Xn is equal to n lambda small n lambda capital D by small d, where n is equal to 0 plus or minus 1 comma plus or minus 2 etc. It is for constructive interference. For destructive interference, Xn is equal to n plus 1 by 2 into lambda capital D by small d, where n is equal to 0 comma plus or minus 1 comma plus or minus 2 etc. Okay. So these two are the conditions we derived for constructive interference and destructive interference. X is the distance between central axis and the arbitrary point. Afterwards we also derived an expression for fringe width, which is the important point ma. Fringe width beta is equal to lambda into capital D by small d. That is the expression for fringe width. Okay, right. There itself we discussed when the bright band will form, or when the central fringe is bright, and then where in what case it is dark. Okay, right. So I already told you when S1P is equal to S2P, so you can say that S1O is equal to S2O. Then we can see a bright central fringe, a bright central fringe. Afterwards, suppose if S1P minus S2P or S2P minus S1P, so this is the difference between S1P and S2P is the integral multiple of lambda, mean you can see the bright fringe. Suppose if it is the integral multiple of lambda by 2, means you can see a dark fringe. Okay. At the same time you can also determine the shape of the wavefront, I mean the shape of the interference pattern, that is in what case it is hyperbola, in what case it is, so that is the shape of the interference pattern you can estimate, right. So when S2P minus S1P is constant, then the locus of the arbitrary point P lying in the xy plane gives the shape of the interference pattern as hyperbola. Okay. So thus the fringe pattern will strictly be a hyperbola. Yesterday I showed you two figures at the ending of the class. I showed to you two pictures. So from those two pictures you can see. So what about the shape of the interference pattern? In first figure it is hyperbola, and in the last, at the second one, it is like straight lines. Okay. However, if the distance capital D is very large when compared to the fringe width, when compared to the fringe width, then the fringes will be very nearly straight lines. The fringes will be very nearly straight lines. Okay, ma? Right. So, roughly in our previous class, we derived an expression for constructive interference and destructive interference in terms of wavelength of light, distance between the slits and the screen on which interference pattern takes place, and also distance between the two slits. Thereafter, we derived an expression for fringe width, and we discussed in what case the fringe will be bright and in the what case the fringe will be dark, and we also discussed what about the shape of the interference pattern. What about the shape of the interference pattern? Okay, right. So, in continuation to that, in this class, first we are going to discuss some information related to the previous class. See here, we should mention here that the fringes are straight lines, although S1 and S2 are point sources. You know very well from our last class, what about S1 and S2? Are the two slits? No, two pinholes, two slits. So, which are the point sources, which acts like a point sources. But if you see the fringe pattern, yesterday I showed you two pictures, not lost. If you see the second one, there itself we can get it, which are the straight lines. Okay, right. If we had slits instead of the point sources, if we have a slit like this, see here you can see single slit. If we had a slits instead of the point sources, each pair of points would have produced straight line fringes like this. Okay, see here. So, these are the fringes, these are the two slits. It is a single slit source, right? Here we have two slits, and here you can see the straight line fringes, resulting in straight line fringes with increased intensities, right? So, here the important point what we have to notice is, if we replace the point source with a line, okay, if you replace the point source with a slit source like this, so you can see in the figure, then the fringes will be straight lines with increased intensities, that you can see in the picture, and you can also see here, right? See this. So, here this is what the scale. So, it is 0, it is lambda, 2 lambda, 3 lambda, even the left hand side also the same, lambda, 2 lambda and 3 lambda, right? So, it is the photograph and the graph of the intensity distribution in Young's double slit experiments, right? Photograph and graph of the intensity distribution in Young's double slit experiments. Okay, right. Now, we are going to discuss two example problems. So, the first example problem is 10.3. See here, two slits are made 1 millimeter apart and the screen is placed 1 meter away. So, when I am explaining this problem, you have to keep in mind what is the source, where are the two pinholes, I mean two slits S1 and S2, then where is the screen, right, and what is capital D and what is small d and what is small x. These and all we have to keep in mind. Two slits are made 1 millimeter apart and the screen is placed 1 meter away, right? You know very well here what is small d, what is capital D, right? So, this is a small d, it is capital D, 1 meter is a capital D. What is the fringe separation when blue green light of wavelength 500 nanometers is used? So, finally, after completion of this problem, at the ending, what he is asking to find? Asking to find fringe separation, or fringe spacing, that is equal to capital D lambda by small d, that is equal to, here capital D means I already told you, 1 meter into lambda is 500 nanometers. So, nano means 10 to the power of minus 9. Already here 2 zeros are there. So that's why 5 into 10 power minus 7 will come. 5 into 10 power minus 7 meters, right? Here 1 into 10 power minus 3. 1 into 10 power minus 3, because it is 1, it is what is 1 millimeter, no? Small d is 1 millimeter. That you have to convert into meter. So you know very well, in one physics problem, while substituting the given quantities, all the quantities should be in one system of unit, right? Whether it is SI or CGS. So here all the quantities we are taking in SI. So the answer will become in SI. Afterwards you can convert into whatever the system we want, you can convert. So here if you do this calculation, you will get it as 5 into 10 to the power of minus 4 meters. 5 into 10 to the power of minus 4 meters. That is equal to 0.5 mm. 0.5 millimeter. That is the fringe spacing. Right. Next one is example 10.4. Example 10.4. Right. So this example is very important for us. Why? Because with this example problem, we can understand the consequences, the positives and the negatives, the advantages and disadvantages, the achievements and the modifications, right? So if you do some modifications according to the setup done by the Young's scientist, what will happen? That is very important, no? One of the important thing is, because of Young's double slit experiment, it is possible to get, because of Young's double slit experiment, we are getting interference pattern on the screen. We are getting interference pattern on the screen, so that the bright fringes and dark fringes will be formed. So we also derived conditions for a dark fringe and bright fringe. Okay, right. But now if you do some modifications, for example, width of the two slits, the distance between the two slits will increase. What will happen? Suppose the distance between the two slits and the screen will be increased. What will happen? Suppose if the source is very close to the two slits, what will happen? So these are called as consequences, right? So which are very important for us. For when we are going to attempt a problem from competitive exams also, this knowledge is very important for us to solve the related problem. See here, what is the effect on the interference of fringes? What is the effect on the interference of fringes in Young's double slit experiment due to each of the following operations? Each of the following operations. Okay, see here. First, A, the screen is moved away from the plane of the slits. The screen is moved away from the plane of the slits. Next, B, the monochromatic, the source. So in the bracket, monochromatic. Monochromatic means single. Mono means single, chromo means color, having one wavelength, right? So the source is replaced by another source of shorter wavelength. This is important, right? So the monochromatic source is replaced by another monochromatic source of shorter wavelength. Next, C, the separation between the two slits is increased. The separation between the two slits is increased. Next, the source slit is moved closer to the double slit plane. The source slit is moved closer to the double slit plane. Next, the width of the source slit is increased. The width of the source slit is increased. So every point in this question we have to imagine, along with the imagination of Young's experimental setup. So that's, I already told you the beginning of this problem. So what is a source slit? What about the two slits? Right, acts as a two sources of, which gives two waves to get interference pattern. At the same time, you have to imagine where is the screen, right? So in our previous class, I drew on the board. That picture you have to keep in mind while discussing this example problem. See here. So the first point is here. First you try to understand the problem. That is what is the effect on the interference of fringes in a Young's double slit experiment due to each of the following operations. So the first operation is, the screen is moved away from the plane of the slits, right? So there are two slits now. In our Young's double slit experimental setup, in the middle of that, between the single slit and the screen on which interference pattern will get, so double slit is there. So here also you can see, right? So between these two, right, the screen is moved away. So this is the screen which is moving away from the plane of the slits. Then what happens to the interference pattern? Right? See here. So one more thing is also there here, that is F, that we have to find. That is, when the monochromatic source is replaced by white light, what happens to the interference pattern? That also we have to discuss, right? So first we are going to focus on A, that is, if the screen is moved away from the plane of the slits, if the screen is moved away from the plane of the slits, what will happen? See here, angular separation of the fringes remains constant. Angular separation of the fringes remains constant. You may have a doubt, what is angular separation? So angular separation is the ratio of wavelength of light to the distance between the slits, distance between the two slits, distance between the two slits, which is called as angular separation. So if the screen is moved away, if the screen is moved away from the plane of the slits, there is no change in the angular separation. But what will happen? The actual separation of the fringes increases. The actual separation of the fringes increases in proportional to the distance of the screen from the plane of the two slits. So as you are going to move away the screen, from two slits, the actual separation of the fringes will be increased. So that we can say the actual separation of the fringes is directly proportional to the distance of the screen from the plane of the two slits, right? So to answer A, while answering to A, he is talking about, one is angular separation, another one is actual separation. So angular separation remains constant, no change, but actual separation of the fringes will be increased in proportional to the distance of the screen from the plane of the two slits, okay, right. Now B, see here, the monochromatic source is replaced by another monochromatic source of shorter wavelength, okay, right. See this one. So B, so if you do like that, what we are doing? We are replacing a monochromatic source with another monochromatic source of shorter wavelength. Then here the separation of the fringes will be decreased. And angular separation also decreases. Here separation of the fringes will be decreased and angular separation also decreased when you replace a monochromatic source with another monochromatic source of shorter wavelength. Next, C, the separation between the two slits is increased, right? The separation between the two slits is increased, means he is increasing small d. So when he is increasing small d also, the separation of the fringes and angular separation also, separation of the fringes and angular separation also decreases, same like B. So in case of C and same like B. I will conclude once about B and C. You just keep in mind. If the monochromatic source is replaced by another monochromatic source of shorter wavelength or the separation between the two slits is increased. For these two things, the angular separation and separation of the fringes will be decreased. There is also one condition. That condition we will discuss when I will answer to D. Okay, see here, right? When we will answer to D, see here. Next, it is what? The source slit is moved closer to the double slit plane. D is if the source slit is moved closer to the double slit plane, right? So where is the source slit? Here. Where is the double slit? We know. when source slit is moved closer to the double slit plane, what will happen? See here. For interference fringes to be seen on the screen, there is one condition. So this condition we have to keep in mind. Small s by capital S is less than lambda by small d. So what is lambda? Wavelength of light. What is small d? Distance between the two slits. But what is small s means, which is the size of the source. What is capital S means? It is the distance from the plane of the two slits, right? So S is the capital S is the distance of the source. Distance of the source from the plane of two slits, that is the capital S. So the ratio of these two things, size of the source to the distance of the source from the plane of two slits, is less than or equal to lambda by d. Lambda by d to get interference fringes on the screen. Suppose if the condition is not satisfied, then what will happen? You cannot see any interference pattern on the screen. We cannot see any interference pattern on the screen. Okay, that is right. So that is the main thing here. No fringes are seen when this condition is not satisfied, right? At the same time, for example, we are going for different cases. For example, if capital S decreases, then what will happen? The interference pattern gets less and less sharp. Otherwise, when the source is brought too close for this condition to be valid, then what will happen? Fringes will be disappear. But at the same time, fringe separation remain fixed. Okay. So while answering to the D, that is, when the source slit is moved closer to the double slit plane, here we have some condition. That condition is small s by capital S is less than lambda by d. This condition must be satisfied to get interference pattern on the screen. Otherwise, fringes will not appear. So no interference. No interference means you cannot see the fringes on the screen. Okay, that is the point. And one more thing is, if S decreases, capital S, if S decreases, the interference pattern gets less sharp, and when the source is brought very too close to make this condition to be valid, the fringes will be disappear, but fringe separation remain fixed. Next, E. The width of the source slit is increased. Same thing will happen. What happened in case of D? The same thing will happen. So if you increase width of the source slit, what will happen? The same thing. What is that? The fringe pattern will get less and less sharp. At the same time, if this condition is not satisfied, the interference pattern disappears. So whatever you are doing, whether you are increasing the width of the source, whether you are increasing the distance between the source slit and double slit, right? Source slit and double slit, whether you are making to increase or whether you are making the source slit to move closer to the double slit, so changes, right? Two things, one is whether you are increasing the width of the source slit, or when you are decreasing the distance between the source slit and the double slit plane, there should be some condition. That condition should be satisfied to get the interference pattern. If that condition is not satisfied, means you cannot see any fringes on the screen. But that fringe separation remains fixed. The fringe separation remains fixed till the condition satisfied. When the condition is satisfied, you can see the interference pattern and the fringe separation remain fixed. When this condition is not satisfied, there are no fringes, the fringes will disappear, then you can say that no interference pattern on the screen. Next, the last one is F. It is when the monochromatic source is replaced by white light. When the monochromatic source is replaced by white light. You know very well, white light is not monochromatic. It consists of 7 wavelengths, 7 different wavelengths from violet to red. So if this monochromatic source is replaced by white light, what will happen? That is the question. See here. First, the interference pattern due to different component of colors of white light overlap. So white light consists of 7 different wavelengths now. 7 different wavelengths and different component of colors from violet to red. Okay. So when these all are going to form interference pattern, right, then you can see the white light. Then you can see the white light, but it is incoherently, right. So I will repeat once again. The interference patterns due to different component of colors of white light overlap incoherently. That is important. Next, the central bright fringes of different colors are at the same position. So there is no change in the position of central fringe. There is no change in the position of central bright fringe, and that is also white. That is also white. So when you replace this monochromatic source with white light, the position of the central bright fringe will not change, and that is also white light. White. Next, there are two things, One is S2P minus S1P is equal to lambda B by 2. S2P minus S1P is equal to lambda R by 2, right. So when S2P minus S1P is equal to lambda B by 2, right, here blue is absent, then the fringe will appear in red color. The fringe, for this condition, the blue color will be absent and the fringe will appear in red color. Similarly, when this condition is valid, that is S2P minus S1P is equal to lambda R by 2, here red will be absent and the fringe will appear in blue color. Fringe will appear in blue color, right. So here you can say that the fringe closest on either side of the central white fringe, because the central fringe is white, no. The fringe close on either side. So the either, that is what, top side or bottom side to the central fringe is red, right. The fringe closest on either side of the central white fringe is red and the farthest will appear as blue, right. After few fringes, no clear fringe pattern is seen. So you can see like central fringe is white and after central fringe either top or bottom will be red and beyond this will be blue. This is the situation present on the screen when monochromatic source is replaced by white light. Okay. So regarding this example problem, if you made these changes to the Young's experiment, so whatever the changes or operations he is asking according to the question, this is the result. So whatever I explained, that is the result. Okay. So once again you go through the textbook problem, which is at page number 366. This problem helps us a lot, because just because of this single problem we are getting a clear idea about Young's experiment. Okay. So preparing is one side, but discussion in different ways is another side. So that we need as much as possible also. Okay. So that's why you focus on this example 10.4, which helps us even for NEET and mains also from this chapter wave optics. Okay, right. So in this class we focused on if we replaced a point source with a slit source, what happens to the interference pattern. Next, we went to discuss one example problem 10.3. There we calculated fringe spacing based on the given values. Next, we went to discuss the consequences in Young's double slit experiment if you do some operations. Okay. So there they have given 6. Out of 6, here 4 are important. So A, B are different, C, D are giving the same result, and E, F. Okay. C and D are giving the same B and C are giving the same result, and D and E also giving the same result. Then entirely F will be different here. Okay, right. We will continue in the next class.